Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Poison Pen. We had a wonderful conversation with Alice Feeney, her very first virtual event, just before this. So if you're watching this program, you might want to also catch Alice, who said lots of nice things about our authors who are joining us this afternoon. We have a real mix. We have a debut author, a sophomore author, and the best-selling author of 18 novels. So lots to talk about. So we're going to start with introducing you to Samantha Downing. Samantha, want to wave at everybody?
Hello.
Hello. So Samantha lives in New Orleans, and her debut novel, My Lovely Wife, was a 2019 bestseller. And its most recent nomination is for the Macavity Award, after nominations for the Edgar Allan Poe Award and the Thriller Award for Best First Novel. That's pretty impressive. Wow.
It's exciting. Definitely. It's one of those things you don't expect, and then it happens, and it's great.
It is great. You know, over 31 years, we have walked along the path with so many authors, and it's always interesting for us, and I'm not making this a dire prediction, it's always interesting for us to see how authors handle success. Some of them have done just so well with it, and some of them it's paralyzing. So, you know, I'm glad that you're at book 2. You're at least past that, initial push. And the hard one to write is generally the second book. Has that been true for you?
I completely agree. Yes, the second one was the hardest one, and I actually wrote one in between My Lovely Wife and he started it that we completely threw out. So I had 3 months to write. He started it, and it finished just before My Lovely Wife came out. So book 2 is, everybody said it would be hard, and I didn't believe them, and that was my mistake. It was definitely the hardest thing ever.
Well, I think there's a double whammy. When you're so successful with your first book, the weight of expectations is that much greater, and makes it more, difficult, I think, for some authors to write a second book. Of course, the other part is you had forever to write your first book. There were no deadlines, nobody cared. It was just one of those things. But once you're out there in the world, then there's also that whole other weight of expectation. And generally, we end these conversations, and I'll ask it of all three of you, with the burning question from your fans, which is, what are you working on next? Because they can hardly bear the thought that you might not write another book. So, let me move back here. My Lovely Wife, I love this capsule description, has been described as Dexter meets Mr. and Mrs. Smith in this wildly compulsive debut thriller about a couple whose 15-year marriage has finally gotten too interesting. Wow. How can a marriage get too interesting?
I think when you start killing people, I think that's the moment it gets too interesting, at least for them. Anyway, I think the idea was to write about the lengths people will go to save their marriage, and I just took it to the most extreme possible, which is becoming serial killers. So there is a lot of satire in the book about married life, about family life, about living in the suburbs. It's not a dark and bleak book, despite how it sounds, I guess.
No, it isn't dark and bleak, but the whole folie à deux thing has been very well explored in true crime and crime fiction, that people who on their own might not have ever done some dark deed, somehow or other, when paired up with another person, they fuse together and it happens. So I thought it was quite believable that they could go to this extreme, and it gets out of control. It was a really fascinating book. We don't want to do any spoilers, but we didn't get to talk to you. Sadly, you were not able to come and visit us. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we move on to your new book?
Just that I think the idea is that, in my experience with people, when you do something wrong the first time, it's the hardest. It's a lot easier to do it the second time. And and that can be for anything, whether it's lying or stealing or killing. Again, it just takes that idea to the extreme, that that first time you cross the line is extremely difficult, and it gets easier and easier and easier after.
We'll come back to He Started It, but let's move on and introduce Adele Parks, who was born in the north of England, up in Teesside, but now lives down in Surrey. You're basically a neighbor of Alice Feeney, which I find fascinating. Who knew?
Yeah, we're in the same county, we have the same agent, and we are published in the UK by the same publishing house. So yeah, here we are. I did think when I was setting up and waiting for the interview, I was thinking, I can't watch Alice and wait for this interview, so I will watch her on catch up. Yeah.
Well, yes, you can easily do that. So Adele has 3.5 million UK edition copies of her novels. Her books have been translated in over 26 languages. Every one of her 18 novels has been a bestseller in the UK. And now here's a question for you, Adele. You've been described as a women's fiction writer. So this is one of those moments where I find that English divides us as a common language. What does that actually mean in UK English? What is a women's fiction writer?
I think it means that's incredibly patronizing. It's, I'm just saying.
It's not my phrase. Let me disclaim that right now.
Clearly hoping nobody in marketing in England is ever going to see this, which of course they are. Yeah, so I think it's because I have been writing for 18 years, and I started in one genre and I have moved into a much sort of darker domestic noir psychological thriller. And so to kind of distinguish between books that were about relationships but there wasn't a body count, and books that are about relationships but there is a body count, they sort of said, oh, well, the first books are women's fiction books, and these later books men can read too. It's amazing. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a marketing term. It's so divisive. Here we are in the 21st century, and if somebody writes about relationships, it has to be for women, because men clearly can't understand relationships, don't get that, since they're 50% of the population, or 49. So yeah, it's a crazy phrase, but it's better than the one they had before, which was chick lit. So small steps.
I'm going to be really rude and tell you that there was an enormous thing about chick lit here in the United States, and there was just one cover image, and every time it was the back of women's legs in Fuck Me Pumps. That was absolutely the cover. Do you all remember that? We could go to the store, we could see all this, you had to have a really good-looking rear view. The model. But it was the shoes that were always the giveaway. I've often thought that maybe Jimmy Choo or Manuel, Blahnik made a fortune off chick lit, because it was all about the shoes for so long. Lord. So your most sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's actually a joy writing in psychological thrillers, because you do move away from that sexism. Because nobody questions the gender of the person writing the book or the gender of the person reading the book and psychological thrillers the way they do with I don't know, other genres. So yes, it's quite freeing. I'm really enjoying it. I'm sort of 4 or 5 psychological thrillers in, and I'm loving it.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. Your most recent book in the UK is called Just My Luck, published in May, but it hasn't made it here to the US. So we're going to be talking in a little bit about Lies, 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 which is your new U.S. book. So, Stephanie, I have to ask you, which suburb in Chicago?
Oh, I grew up in Darien and then moved to Lamont when I was 12, so kind of half and half in those two.
Darien, Connecticut.
Do you know them?
Well,
no, Darien, Illinois. Most people don't know them. They're like the southwest suburbs.
Well, I grew up in Winnetka, which is the reason I was asking you, because I too am a suburban Chicago person, and I wondered if we had somehow or other shared some common childhood landscapes. But honestly, no, you're right. I haven't heard of Darien.
If you know like Downers Grove or Naperville, it's kind of around that area.
I do. I know both. So there we are. But now you're living in the UK, where you've been for a while, and you too, like Samantha, were going to come and see us in April with your debut novel, which was going to be our April first mystery book of the month, and that was shot down by the pandemic. We're really sorry. Your UK title is The Recovery of Rose Gold, and your American title is Darling Rose Gold. Why the distinction? Were you part of the conversation about the two titles?
I was part of the conversation, but I feel like as more of an observer. I mean, I was coming up with ideas and stuff for titles, but ultimately it was the publisher's decision. So it was actually The Recovery of Rose Gold when my agent took it out, and the UK kept that, and then the US team switched it to Darling. But when I first came up with titles, actually Rose Gold was never in the title. So that was a suggestion by my agency because the name seemed to be clicking with a lot of different people.
It is an interesting name. You and Samantha actually share the same publisher, which is Berkeley. So I don't know, have the two of you ever met before, or is this it?
No, this is it.
No. She's in the UK.
Yeah.
Didn't know if she'd made a flash visit or something before it all happened.
Maybe someday.
Yeah. Maybe when we're back on a real tour.
Yeah.
Well, we can certainly hope for it. Now, we do actually have an example of the two different covers. Adele's book, let me pull it off the wall here, Lies, Lies, Lies. This is the American cover. Adele, was it like this? Is this similar to the UK cover?
Should I get you the UK cover?
Well,
Would you like to see it?
can while we move along here. Samantha, we've got your book right here. And by the way, a commercial moment. Samantha has been kind enough to sign copies of He Started It and ship them to us. So we'd love it if you would buy one of our autographed copies. And for Stephanie, because she's in the UK, we do still have over there on the wall there. I can't quite reach it. We still have 3 copies left of The Recovery of Rose Gold, your UK book, which you autographed for Goldsboro. And, well, we import loads of books from the UK, so we were able to get the autographed copy. But your American copy, the Patrick, can you? Sure, sorry, that's the British.
Okay, I have it.
All right.
This is the US one.
Oh, you got it. Okay, so you can see that there's quite a difference, and I always find that fascinating that that publishers have such different visions in different countries about not so often titles, but frequently titles, but almost always about the way to present the book in terms of the cover art. So you can see that the UK one, which has the scissors and is quite spare, and then the American one is rosier. That'd be the right word, right?
Pinker, yeah.
It's very much about where the markets are at and who you're advertising to, and I find it fascinating actually across all the markets. Just to answer your question, those are the two. So the tape stayed the same, and the floorboards stayed the same, and actually the colorway stayed the same, and the fact there's a doorway. But this one has legs, which we have discussed, and this one has has the flowers. This is the American one. But I think there's a level of destruction here is sort of obvious. But I think it's really fascinating when they change titles, or I find quite hard not to change titles, although it has happened to me before from the UK to the US. But covers I'm really relaxed about. I always think the publishing house in that country know more than I know about that country, and so if they want to do a completely different cover, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I do think you have to trust them to understand their audience. I know the wall behind you, because we talked to you earlier since you signed in first, is your international editions. And both of you will be acquiring those too, right? As your books are sold into other countries and translated. It's kind of fun to get, all those different, we have had authors over the years send us, because they really don't know what to do with so many of their foreign language books, and we have a global audience here at the store. We've always been basically an internet bookstore. We're the Amazon of independent publishing. I mean, independent bookstores. We really are, and so we've had foreign editions of books here for sale. We've had a chance to look at like the Polish and the Russian and the, others, and it's always been fascinating to see the differences. So let's go back to Samantha and talk about He Started It. So Samantha,
this one I have.
There you are. Right, we have it too.
Yeah, you were talking about covers. Both of my U.S. covers have women with weapons on the cover. This one has a shovel, and my lovely wife had a knife. But the UK covers had a woman's face, half a woman's face, sort of. So no weapons in the UK.
Okay. Well, I'm never entirely sure what all that says, but again, if you trust your publisher, you have to assume that. I mean, I always find it fascinating to wonder who is the audience that you see for your books and who is the audience your publisher sees for your books, and whether they really coincide. And who's the audience we see for your books? I mean, there's a multitude of different opinions here. Anyway, I really love the way that, and I'm trying to remember whether this is a review I read or something, but he started it. The first line that I read about, he started it, "We are a family of assholes. You can blame that on Grandpa. He started it." With this description, how can one not want to read more about the Morgan family and Samantha Downing's acerbic new thriller? Grandpa recently died, and his last wish is for his grandchildren to recreate the road trip they all took when they were children. So that's the setup for your book, and it gives you just a great chance to not only take a road trip, but explore all kinds of landmarks and do what you will with them. Who knew that landmarks and statues were going to come right into the forefront of discussion? I mean, you wrote this book long before this moment in time when we're tearing down landmarks.
Yes, and what's really funny is that they're stuck in this car. It's 3 siblings and 2 of their spouses, and of course, before the virus ever came about, one of them has a line in the book that says, "It's like we're quarantined." And who knew we would then be in the quarantine? But a road trip like this can really be like that, because they are estranged siblings. They're not close, so they don't really want to be in this car. They have to be in the car. So it is like they're stuck together all day, every day in the car, driving across the country, starting from Atlanta and driving across the country. And there are lots of secrets and grudges and all the things that siblings have that have gone on since childhood that they have to deal with along the way.
So there must be an incentive for them to be doing this. Is it a spoiler to tell us what the incentive
No, not
is?
at all. It's to get their grandfather's inheritance. They went on the same road trip when they were children with their grandfather driving, and their grandfather has made it a stipulation of his will that they take the trip again and scatter his ashes at the end. And that's where he wants his final resting point to be. So the book flashes back and forth between the current road trip and the one when they were children, and you can see all the secrets and all the things that they're dealing with along the way.
That's one of the things I really love about crime thrillers, is that most of the time, in order to explain how we got to where we are in the present, we have to go back to all the things that happened in the past. And, the pacing is got so much to do with how the book works, how you reveal the secrets, the pacing and the structure together. So did you find that more challenging writing this book in this structure than you did in your first book?
No, not necessarily. I don't plot my books and I don't outline them at all. I just sit down and start writing, and I discover the story the same way a reader would, which is what makes it enjoyable. I've tried plotting and it makes it like work, and I don't enjoy it anymore. So everything is written organically. The first chapter is always the first chapter. I've never changed the first chapter, and hopefully I never will, because that's when my first decisions are made as a writer on the story, and I go from there. And so for me, it comes naturally. I get to a point in the story where I think I've got to go into how we got here, and then I do a flashback scene, and so it's written very organically in that way. And of course, it always requires revisions afterwards. But the first chapter of My Lovely Wife I wrote while sitting in the Milwaukee airport, and I was waiting for a flight, and I wrote the chapter waiting for my flight, and it remains exactly the same today as it was when I wrote it that day. So it does that answer the question? I don't want to keep rambling.
It was just an observation. I mean, interestingly, often we find that authors start a story and they don't start it where it really starts, and then they have to go back and like whack out the first chapter or two, because it turned out that the book really began in chapter 3, but they had to write the first 2 to get to chapter 3. So you apparently have a gift for figuring out where the story begins.
Well, My Lovely Wife was the 12th book that I've written. So my first book was not published. I have written a lot of books before that as a hobby. I've been writing for 20 years, and I know the cardinal sin of starting a story too soon. And so I've done it before many times. And My Lovely Wife starts after they have already started their extracurricular hobby, so of killing people. So how they got there is told in flashback. And so but I do think you're right. Many people do write the first couple chapters to get themselves into the story, and then the real story begins somewhere between chapter 3 and chapter 5.
So Adele, your book Lies, Lies, Lies deals with a family, a happy marriage, a couple with a child that they adore, and the father in particular wants to have a second child, even though they're now in their mid-40s. And that's the ostensible structure, but you give us a prologue, and all the way through is the thrum of alcoholism and, you know, the destructive effects of alcoholism on children and adults and on family. Why did you decide to make that the hard social issue in your book?
Yeah, I think I was quite surprised, because I'm sure, as we all do, I read a lot, and I hadn't really seen in fiction, or I have seen in many memoirs, people tackling alcoholism as you say, as a family, and how it starts and all the rest of it. And it's not too much of a spoiler to say, you know, this guy is desperate for another child, and that's one of the reasons his kind of functioning alcoholism stops functioning. And the other reason, and the book's called Lies, 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 this is hardly a spoiler, it's kind of chapter 1, is there's a question over the paternity of the first child, and that kind of spirals him into drinking a lot more. And I do think it's really interesting that we all have a relationship with alcohol, even if we abstain. Because if you abstain from alcohol, it's a little bit like blocking your ex on your phone. It's because you know if they ring you, they can still bother you. So abstaining from alcohol still says, I've still got an issue with it. So it is a relationship we all have, where I don't think we all necessarily have a relationship with narcotics. Obviously, many people do, but not everybody does. But because alcohol is made to be so sort of available and actually often part of our celebrations, if you have a problem with alcohol, how do you avoid it, and how do you function? And yeah, he actually destroys the things that he loves the most, and as you say, it's the thrum throughout the book, and you watch him sort of the marriage and the family in free fall because of his addiction. But he isn't the only person with an addiction in this book. I mean, Daisy, the wife, she's addicted to kind of presenting a perfect family, to the point where she will ignore the fact that they have issues, and he clearly has issues, and she'd rather just kind of pretend everything's okay. And I think that happens too. And I just thought it was every year, every time I write a new novel, and I'm so different, Samantha, in so much as I do plot, I always have the same, I have something exactly the same. My first chapter is always the same first chapter. My first line is always the same first line. I get in there, but I do plot. And especially in Lies, 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 that for me in this particular book, it was really essential, because it's got a number of reveals and things you don't expect, because he's an unreliable narrator, the way drunks are, actually. They're unreliable people. They might be the most charming, amazing people to be around, but they're very rarely reliable, which makes them fascinating characters.
It does. When I was talking to Alice earlier, we were discussing the fact that I'm finding in books coming from the UK that there is much more to do with infertility, much more to do with child raising practices and so forth. And I ascribe part of that to the fact that that a national medicine program gives more of a common experience to women in the UK than you can achieve here in the United States, where our medical system is so fragmented. And
yeah, I mean, infertility, you could get IVF on National Health, so you can get one round for free, which I bet you're listening to and go, what? Because it's just such a privilege. Actually, it's a really amazing thing. And interestingly, in lockdown and the pandemic, one of the all the hospitals, everything that was non-emergency, all kind of closed down and calmed down. And one of the first things the government reintroduced was IVF treatment, like pre-cancer treatments, because they were saying, we know it's time, like we know it's so time sensitive, and we know so many couples live or die by what they can do as a family. And I think that also for me is quite interesting, because I think I write a lot about women's choices to choose a life that's child-free, or you might want dozens of kids. There's different ways of deciding what fulfills you and what doesn't. But if you happen to be a kind of couple that having children is so essential to fulfilling you, the way it is for Daisy and Simon, then there are options in the UK. So you're right. I think it's a bit more of an experience we can tackle and we talk about. We talk about it as though, we talk about it as much as the virus. We do talk about it, and people talk about their IVF, and it's not very secretive.
It's a slightly different reading experience for Americans, I think, only because we don't have that commonality. And I'll come back to that whole British thing about keeping yourself to yourself and worrying about what the neighbors think and all, which for Samantha clearly is not an issue, and not for Stephanie either. So that's a different sensibility also, which is fun to read about. I mean, it's really exploring a different culture, even though we have a common language. It's quite different. So Stephanie, you started your career in advertising as a copywriter and then an associate creative writer. So that puts you in the company of Dorothy L. Sayers and Clive Cussler. Did you know that?
Not too bad. I've actually, I keep hearing about more and more novelists who started in advertising. I think it's a really good way to cut your teeth. I mean, it forces you to learn the art of concision, and it also really thickens your skin because there's a lot of rejection in advertising. So I think I didn't think this at the time. I didn't have this like neat plan or trajectory of like, okay, I'll start in advertising and then I'll move on to fiction. It just I kind of bumped my way into it like a lot of people. But yeah, it was great training for sure.
Well, it does teach you to be economical with words, or at least to make every word count, which I think is a very useful thing when you want to become a novelist. So do I remember right that you've had something like 221 rejections on your path to publishing your first novel?
Yeah, so those are all short stories. So one takeaway is that I'm clearly not a good short story writer, but that's fine. When I was in graduate school, I was getting my MFA, and I had no formal creative writing training. So it was in between freelance jobs in advertising that I just kind of felt like I didn't have that much to lose at this point. I wasn't walking away from a salaried job. So I went to this MFA program, and the MFA structure really works well for short stories, less so for novels. So I was writing a lot of short stories at that point. But it was writing my thesis that I wrote Darling Rose Gold, and it ended up serving as my thesis. And then, at the end of that process, that was when my advisors really suggested that I send it out to agents and see what happens.
I think you have that in common with Robert B. Parker, although I have to go back and check. But if his first book wasn't his graduate thesis, he did write something. Patrick, do you remember?
The first was the graduate thesis on Chandler.
Yeah, he wrote a graduate thesis on Chandler, which then moved him off into writing Spencer, the Godwolf manuscript, and so forth. So lots of people have views that an MFA program can kind of kill you as a writer of commercial fiction and directs your energy in other directions. But for some people, obviously, it works extremely well. So for true crime viewers who like to read the crime novel that starts after the true crime episodes, The Recovery of Rose Gold, this review says, may be for you. Let me explain. Patty Watts is finishing her 5-year prison sentence after being found guilty of having made her daughter, Rose Gold Watts, sick her whole life. Rose Gold's testimony is what put Patty away. Patty doesn't understand why Rose Gold lied, and now Rose Gold wants to make amends. And we can't really say too much about the central issue in this story without a total spoiler, right?
Well, I think we can. I mean, I from the very first, I never say the words Munchausen by proxy in the novel, but from the first chapter, you know, we know what Patty has been convicted of, why she's in prison. And, you know, she's saying, I didn't do it, but she has been in prison for 5 years. So the reader can draw the conclusions from there. But that actually is, I wanted to start with, you know, it's not some twist or anything like what this mother is dealing with or what she's done. Because the whole impetus for the story was, what is going through the head of someone with this illness? Like, do they know that they're lying? Do they honestly think they're doing what's best for their child? And so in order to do that, I think you need to be upfront with the reader as to what exactly we're facing and what journey we're going to go on together.
It's a Wicked syndrome. It's been, it's cropped up a couple of times recently, and in the past was occasionally dealt with. It's such a horrendous syndrome that people don't really want to write about it because, you know, torturing children in order to gain attention or monetary reward is difficult to contemplate. But the real question is, why does Rose Gold want to accept her mother back into her life if that's what's been going on? Which I'm not expecting you to answer.
Yeah, no. That question we probably don't want to answer.
No, we don't. But I mean, it really is, as you point out, you're so upfront at the beginning, then that is the question the reader then gets to explore during the rest of the book, you know, is what's going on. And I think you did a wonderful job with it. So I'm going to pose a point to all three of you. Years ago, when Manette Walters and I were doing an event here in the bookstore, she said that it's crucial that the author delivers an end as good as the beginning. And so all of you have now talked about beginning, how you begin your books and stick with it. Tell me how you feel about whether you delivered the end in these books that is as good as the beginning. Any one of you wants to start?
I can start. I'm very happy to talk about that. So for me, because I do it differently to Samantha when I do plot, I know where my end is going to be, and it was just because, and by the way, there's literally no right or wrong way, which I'm sure all readers know, that every author you talk to has a different way of working and practicing. But I know where I'm going, and I know there's a number of reveals, and I know that I'm taking the reader up a number of paths, and I expect my readers to say, I guessed that bit. I'm hoping they'll say, that bit surprised me, but when I worked it out, it was the exact way it should have been. And there's that sort of sense of not all is right with the world, because very often it isn't, but as sort of everybody's in the place that actually seems natural, considering their characters and considering the past we've just traveled with them. And so I did know exactly where I was going, and it's quite a brutal and shocking, in a way, my ending. And I love writing my endings, and my endings happen very quickly. I write sort of 1,000 to 2,000 words every day, so I kind of know how long it takes me to write a novel. And then suddenly, towards the end, I find myself writing 4,000 or 5,000 words very easily, because I am so excited to take the reader to where where I've been planning for 8 months or something to take them. So I was particularly excited with Lies, 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 because you mentioned it was published in the UK last year, and it's just now here in the States. I think we put it back because we were hoping that it would come out, and then of course the pandemic happened and I didn't get out anyway. But in the UK, it was my first #1 hit, after sort of, literally 19 years of books that all hit the top 10, but didn't hit the #1 position. And I think it was because of the ending that people would say to each other, I can't tell you what happened. You have to read it for the ending. So it's very much a word of mouth book. So I hope that I delivered on it. And also I've given you all time to think. by chatting.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So Samantha, you want to be next?
Both of my books have endings that don't really tie the story up in a bow. They have room for interpretation and room for your own opinion on what happened. The ending of He Started It in particular is polarizing, and I already know this, and I knew it when I wrote it, and I've already had people contact me and say that they have thrown the book across the room when they finished it, and I'm okay with that. And I would rather have somebody love it or hate it than be about it. So if I can evoke a strong emotion, whether it's love or hate, and some people have contacted me and said it couldn't have ended any other way. It was perfect. So it's 5-star or 1-star ending, depending on where you fall on it. And if you're going to take a risk like that, that's the chance you take, and that's okay. So my view on ending is I want to turn everything upside down when you read the end of the book.
So if Manette was actually saying what you don't want is a flat ending, then you were successful. Stephanie, what do you think?
I think, yeah, Samantha put it really well. I try to do something similar where I give the reader just enough so that like the main questions are answered, but I don't need to give you every single answer. I can let you make some decisions of your own as to where the characters end up after the book. And sometimes that results in questions of like, is there going to be a sequel? I have this and this questions, and it's like, no, like everything's been answered that you need. I mean, the curiosity is nice. It means they're interested in the story, but yeah, I like to leave not the most important things, but I like to leave some stuff kind of open-ended. And same as Samantha, like if that irritates some readers, like I'm willing to take that on, but I like to not have that perfect bow ending as well.
But that's actually also so true of real life, isn't it? When we meet people, we don't get the beginning, middle, and end of their lives. We get a little snapshot, and the most interesting people leave us with questions, and you think about them afterwards. And that's how the most interesting books should play out, I think.
I'm actually a big fan of the ambiguous ending. For example, Gone with the Wind, which has temporarily been a controversial book after all those years here in the United States. But I don't want to know what happened after Scarlett went back to Tara. But that is the end. And I think the reader should feel free to construct whatever life for Scarlett and or Rhett might exist, and it leaves every reader choices. It's really the same with Rebecca, if you think about it. Once the house burned down, that's really the end of Rebecca. And you should. I've never found a sequel to Rebecca that worked. People have tried, and none of them have ever been successful for me, because I don't want someone to finish the story. That ambiguity really is the ending. I like that, and so we all have, I think, different stories. I think can have different endings too, don't you? Where some can be tied up, and others should be left as they were, or just drive the reader mad like Samantha, or whatever you want.
Well, otherwise, every would have to go on to like the death of the person, wouldn't they? And then even then, it wouldn't be finished because they would still be in someone else's memory. Or I think being an author is about getting to the truth of humanity, and the truth of humanity is we don't have beginning, middle, and ends. And so, if you're writing, then that's probably going to be the case. I realise I've gone very dark. It's because of the time difference. It's the evening for us. And I'll soon be a little glowing face in the pitch black, but it's quite spooky. It's quite good.
Yes, you two UK people should be having your glass of wine while, Samantha and I are still tea time or whatever it is we might be doing. So readers always want to know, I mentioned this earlier, so what is it that you are hopefully working on next? So Samantha, how about you?
Another thriller. And that's all I can say about it right now, but it's another thriller, and that's it. That's all I'm saying.
Are you likely to, and you could add this into that question, is where we are at the moment something that you are writing about, or are you writing around it, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, sort of skirting the pandemic. Have you given any thought to that?
I have. At first, I thought it would be something I could skip in my writing because I would stupidly thought it would be over a lot quicker. And in the US, it certainly is not going to be. We're probably looking at another year. So at that point, I think it becomes like what Katrina was in New Orleans. And it was a good primer for what's happening. Everyone who was here during Katrina, their lives are before Katrina and after Katrina. And that's how we talk about it because it changed things so much. And I think the pandemic will do the same thing as we see businesses closing or new businesses opening and shifts in where people work, and everything will be before the pandemic. I worked in an office, now I work from home, et cetera, et cetera. So I think going forward, it has to be, if you're going to write in a modern day setting, it doesn't have to be about the pandemic, but it has to be mentioned that it happened, that it acknowledged that it happened in some way. My next book references it, but is not about the pandemic at all. And certainly the book after that, my fourth book, will be in the post-pandemic world, whatever that looks like.
How about you, Stephanie?
So I am working on my second novel, getting closer. Thank God. It was a little hairy for a while there. As you mentioned earlier, Samantha, the second book has proven to be the hardest. So I'll be glad when it's behind me. But it's about 3 women, and one of them goes off to a self-improvement program on an island off the coast of Maine. And she gets really sucked into this organization, and her sister thinks it's not good for her. So she sets off to try to bring her home. And so, yeah, it's these 3 points of view: the leader of this organization, the member, and then the member's sister who wants her to come home.
And Adele?
Well, so I've got Just My Luck will be coming to the US next year, which is out at the moment, and that's about a syndicate win of a syndicate of a group of friends who play the lottery, and there's 3 couples and they fall out. One of the couples carries on buying the lottery tickets with the same numbers, and 2 of the couples say we don't want anything to do with the lottery, and yet the week after the fallout, they win the lottery. And so the 2 couples that have pulled out obviously will go to quite some extreme lengths to get their share of this huge win. So Just My Luck is the next one for the US. But just this week, I have finished 2021's book. So it's quite the week for me. So that one, that's the tricky one to talk about. I haven't even yet understood how I'm going to talk about that thriller, because pretty much the first bang is the first surprise, and I don't know quite how to bring it, talk about that. It's about 2 women that go missing on the same night in London. They seem as though they're completely unrelated, but there is a connection, and the question throughout the book is, what is that connection, and where are they now?
Well,
Which sounds, yeah.
No, it sounds great. You've got plenty of time to hone your comments and see where we are. Patrick, do you have some questions that you want to forward?
There are a few here.
So here's Patrick, who's doing the Facebook part of this, so he has some questions to ask you.
All right. Hey, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Christine asks, do you think that you will still do virtual events after the pandemic? And Barbara, you can address this too. She says, I am loving these events as we would never get to hear from you all or meet you in person. So the pros and cons of these virtual events. Anybody?
I can see them continuing at some level, for sure. I don't know that they'd ever replace being in a bookstore, but I think it would be a combination of things in the future, because you can't get to every city, so you can't see everybody, and it is a good way to reach out to people.
I think this way is super exciting, because it really feels as though we are in the bookstore and I'm seeing other faces, and I feel that I'm in a proper event, so I'm loving this. But because I did launch Just My Luck throughout lockdown, I did a lot of events where I was talking to like 200 people that were all on, their screens were closed off. So I basically talked for an hour and a half without any feedback, and that was pretty hard. But when they're recorded and you see that thousands of people can catch up and watch it, that's super exciting. I've got something coming up in October, which is a drive-in event. The first literary festival in Britain that's going to be a drive-in event, which I'm super excited about. But I think I really want to go, I just want to go back to actually seeing people and having photos and hugging people and all those things. I just want to go back to them. But I wouldn't rule out that, as you say, Samantha, I think there'll be a bit of a balance.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. The virtual events are really nice, but I haven't had I'm really like looking forward to having a book tour, hopefully someday, because as you mentioned, Barbara, my U.S. tour and stops in Canada and stuff all got canceled, and the book in the U.S. came out, I think, like the week after like all of the international travel and stuff was banned. So I'm really looking forward to that, hopefully someday.
Well, I will say that I'm hoping that we keep a mix, but what's really missing, Adele touched on that, and Samantha has already experienced it as well. There's a lot of energy that comes from having people in the room. There's just a level of excitement and electricity. We are used to, we can push everything out of the bookstore and get several hundred people in, wall to wall, and I sit up in the front because the author's going to be walking towards me and we're going to have a conversation, because this is how we do our events. They're all conversations. We never just stick an author up in front of an audience, with a microphone and say, good luck. We view it as entertainment. And I can't tell you how fascinating it is to watch people come in and sit in the seats and share stuff and nudge each other, get their cameras out, and then there's that moment when the author comes into the room and people hold up their books and it's just, and then they ask questions and they're so excited. I would never want to lose that. But the opportunity to put together blended events from people in different countries or to visit authors. I had the wonderful experience of doing an event at noon with an author in Stockholm and at 4 o'clock with an author in Sydney last week. And I could never have done that, before. We've discovered our second biggest audience for all of this is Australia. Because we have data from that. The podcast downloads will show us a whole map. And the next one is the UK, because there are some British authors who don't tour. And so this is a connecting thing. So I hope we can keep that, but I hope we can go back to the other. And for fans, I think when we can go back to the other, I hope that you will turn out and not do that thing we hear sometimes, which is, well, I'm really busy tonight, I'll catch the author next year. Ooh. Next year sometimes just does not really happen.
Okay, I have a question from a gentleman named Dan who asks, what is the best and the worst thing about being a successful author? It's an interesting question. Is there a worst thing? Is it the inner battle that you all face?
Oh, Samantha, we already touched on that, so I probably made you nervous now about talking about weight of expectations. Oops. What's your thought?
I would say that's the worst. Is it's never just one book. There's another one. There's pressure on every book, and I think the saying in the book world is you're only as good as your last book. So what you did 10 books ago doesn't matter. So I can only hope to make it 10 books in.
Well, an actual benefit of the pandemic is it's surprising. We see it. How many people have gone back to early books, either early books by an author or books that were written decades ago. Some of them are really frustrated because they want to buy a book from us and it's been out of print for like 12 years and there's really nothing we can do about it. So I do think that this has been a time when people are doing more reading and revisiting books that they missed or revisiting books that they read and they loved, and now it will be different to read them. There's a school that says that you should read a book every 10 years because it will read differently every time if you do that. You probably already had, all of you, that experience of reading something you loved and then going back to it. It's not always a good experience in my sometimes it's a little disappointing, but it says a lot about where you are in your own life, I think, when that happens, right? So
Okay, I think one of the hardest things about being a writer is the loneliness, which I think it's a really interesting mix, because writers tend to be people that would rather observe than be involved. Total generalization, but that's kind of where we're at. But we need to observe, and we need to sort of be involved to kind of understand people and to be able to reflect that and all the rest of it. And the more successful you get, and the more accessible we all are, which we all are because we're all on social media, and that's the world we live in now. But we've kind of got a relatively this is authors generally, you know, you can have to have quite a thin skin to be sensitive and aware and be able to write about humanity. You need a really thick skin that someone will say, yeah, that's not as good as your last one, not really that, yeah, and just can throw out anything. So there is this temptation to kind of hide away and be on your own for hours and hours and hours, but you've got to be out there. And it's getting that balance of, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years of, when people are saying, I've been locked down for like 3 weeks, I'm like, yeah, I've been locked down for 20 years. And so the idea of not being able to go out on an evening is almost the norm. And it's, I've noticed through the pandemic, I've realized it's a really weird norm. We need to get out more, girls. Now I know Stephanie's in England, I'm gonna go find her. But you know, I think there is that kind of, that mix between very private and yet now very public as a writer. I don't think 20 years ago when I started being a writer, I would have expected, I'd never thought about the marketing of a book, and it never crossed my mind. I just wrote my book and I put it out there, and actually in those days that was fine. Where now that's an nth of it. I would say actually writing a book is about half my job now.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Patrick, anything else?
Yeah, let me see here.
He's looking through the Facebook questions, so it
Yes,
takes a moment
yes.
to synthesizes some of them.
Yeah, there are some similarity to the questions, but somebody's asking about your writing environment. Can you kind of, each of you, take us behind the curtain? Are you able to write in a public place, in cafes? Does it have to be a quiet room? Do you have music? Tell us a little bit about your writing space.
Ooh, Stephanie, let's start with you, because you're not only
Sure.
you're in a foreign country, so to speak, while you're pursuing this, and your first experience with it.
Yeah, so this is funny you should ask. This is actually a new office because I just moved house last month, so it's not set up yet, which is why everything's just, you know, bare walls. But yeah, I do most of my writing at home. I prefer that to a cafe. I like to write in silence. This isn't very fun, but in silence. If I'd really only listen to music if it was to block out other noise, and it would have to be instrumental. I really can't listen to music with words when I'm also writing. So for me, it's pretty much just a desk or a comfy chair to sit in, and my computer as quiet as I can get it, and that's about it. I mean, if I needed to, I could write in a cafe or wherever if I had to get the words out, but given my choice, that's what I would opt for.
Well, Samantha, we already know that you can write in an airport, so have you pursued that?
Yeah, most of the time I'm at home, also in total silence, no music, no anything, as early in the morning, so everything is quiet, like the rest of the world is asleep. I can write in a cafe, and I've gone on writing retreat where there are other writers in the room, and at that point, I put on headphones and listen to white noise, and just to block everything out. If I'm in public, I'm usually listening to white noise. Cafes and airports, though, they have that hum of noise where it's just enough that it blocks everything out and nothing comes through typically. But most of it is at home.
How about you, Adele? You're in your office, so I'm assuming that
Yeah, exactly the same as the others.
Do any of you have children at home? Because that's been a real stressor for a number of writers we've talked to.
Yeah, so my kid's he's 19 now, so I've literally had him as a baby, and then as a child, and then as a teen, and now left home. I've literally had every single stage with writing a novel a year with him. And so yeah, that's why I've got one. And not six, because I think I can manage one and a book a year. But I just always say my muse arrives when, you know, when he was little, when he was asleep, or when he was at school. I work knowing it's a job and knowing that I need to get it done when I can. And it's actually a privilege as a parent that you can have a flexible job, and I can, you know, if I want to, I can get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work and get all my hours done before everybody else is up, really. Although sometimes it didn't feel like much of a privilege, it felt like a great big chain around my neck. But you know, I got it done, and I'm glad I've got both aspects to my life. I feel really lucky that I have got a family and I have got a career, so pretty good.
Anybody else there? Oh, all right. So, any questions does anybody have a question you'd like to ask the other two before we sign off here? Has something cropped up that you would like to explore? Or are we all talked out?
I just always think it is really lovely and exciting talking to other authors, because you find how much you have in common, but we all produce something that's very distinctive, and I think that's gorgeous. So it's just nice to say hello.
Yes. Thank you for having me from the US.
Yeah, this is really nice to get to talk to everyone, and thanks for having us, Barbara.
It's really a pleasure. Remind me, Stephanie, do you have relatives or family here in Arizona? Do I recall that you do? And that
I do,
you
yeah.
were going to see them?
Yeah, my parents live in Scottsdale, so I've actually been to your store a couple times. But I think you were on holiday or something. I can't remember who was working in the store, but yeah, we stopped in, and my parents will stop in on occasion. So.
Well, that's really nice. So we have lots in common: Chicago suburbs, parents in Scottsdale, all those good things. It's really been lovely. Thank you all so much for spending an hour with us, which we greatly appreciate. And we will look forward to seeing you here in person, or if not, on screen again, with your next book, which you have told us about. Thank you to our audience for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you will explore these authors' books. If you are not familiar with them, please buy copies. That's your way of, you know, contributing to all of us moving forward through this pandemic. So thanks. Enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you.